Each week, American History TV's American Artifacts visits historic places and museums. The National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. was known as the Pension Building in 1885 when Grover Cleveland's inaugural ball was held in the still unfinished building. Composed of over 15 million red bricks, the building contains a great hall that's 316 feet long and 160 feet high. American History TV visited the building to learn about the inaugural balls of several presidents.
Inaugural balls go back to George Washington, as a matter of fact. The first president in 1789 had a party after his inauguration. At that time, the capital of the United States was not here in Washington, it was in New York City, so the party was there. By 1793, when he was reelected, the party moved to Philadelphia, which has become the capital at that moment in time. Temporarily until the structures were built here in Washington, D.C. By that time, Washington had been identified as the capital city, but it was under construction. The Capitol building was under work, as was the president's house under work. So this wasn't a place you could do that. Now, he liked parties, although Martha wasn't there because she was down at Mount Vernon. But by the time John Adams became president, he'd have none of that. So he decided he'd have no parties at all and purportedly went to his boarding house and had dinner. The first ball that we know of then that was in this town was President Madison in 1809. Dolly Madison was a great, loved to have parties, and so the first one they had, and it was in a hotel. Over succeeding years, they had parties and would have sometimes called a ball, sometimes a party, but it wasn't until the late 1840s that they really began to get into the theme of having an event of special nature here. And they started to build temporary buildings in this Judiciary Area Square of Washington for part of that. This is an image of the building here in what was then still being called the Pension Building. And this was Grover Cleveland's first inauguration, 1885, in the new Pension Building. Again, you can see the bunting up here, the formal gowns, the formal wear, military officers in their formal uniforms. With the epaulets and the braiding on this, and the women again in gowns. And that's been one of the traditions now, is that the women's gowns become very, very important part of what the inaugurational ball is going to look like. This is one of the more elaborate ones, and at the moment in time, this was Helen Taft, again 1909, of a gorgeous gown that she wore, and by those who were familiar with gowns at that point in time, said it was probably the most gorgeous inaugural gown that had been worn up to that point in history. Many of these gowns are now visible and available if you want to see them in the Smithsonian Institution's Museum of American History. The last inaugurational ball in here of the first era, we call them, there's really two eras, was in 1909 with President Taft. He was the last one that had it here. By the time we got to 1913, which was President Wilson, he'd have none of it again. He was more like John Adams, and he decided they were too expensive, too elaborate. He wanted not part of it. And so we started a second period of time in which there were no inaugural balls, either here or any place else in town, until we began to get past World War II, and actually until President Nixon. And President Nixon decided to reinstitute having inaugural balls in this building. So we have a break in here of about 50 years in which there were no balls. But now we get back to 1973, and here's a picture of the space when President Nixon, at the bottom, here's the outside of that wonderful brick building, the great, humongous brick building, with President Nixon's picture here, Vice President Spiro Agnew here, and here now you can clearly see the inside of the building with a stage down here, and many of the participants in that particular event, buntings all along here to show what this will look like in 1973. From that time on, every president has had a ball here. As again, there isn't a ball, there are numerous balls that are conducted during that period of time. There's an official set and then an unofficial set, and those can be as many as they want. Institutions have them, states have them, universities have them all around town, and there'll be any time over that weekend will be something called an inaugural ball. But there's only a limited number that are officially sanctioned by the Presidential Inaugural Committee.